Two young women in their 20s are co-owners of a sawmill business in rural Pennsylvania, running one of the most watched timber channels on YouTube, and neither of them was supposed to be there. That channel is Lumber Capital Logyard. The two women are Emerald and Jade Bron, and the reason this story is worth telling has nothing to do with views or subscriber counts. It has everything to do with what a family had to let go of before they could figure out what they actually had. There is a version of this story that gets told a lot on YouTube. Small-town family builds something from nothing. Hard work, good values, a few viral moments. Channel takes off. Everyone lives the dream. That version is not wrong, but it's not complete either. The Bron family does run a channel that pulls tens of millions of views. They do operate out of rural Pennsylvania with no outside employees. And yes, by most measures, the thing they built qualifies as a success. But underneath that surface-level arc is a different story. A story about a plan that didn't survive contact with real life. A plan that involved completely different people. And what happened when the family had to rebuild the future around whoever was still standing. Ken Bron started his first business in 2005. He called it Ironwood Acres, and it had nothing to do with YouTube, nothing to do with a sawmill, and almost nothing in common with what the family does today. It was residential tree removal. One man, one set of skills, climbing problem trees on suburban properties in north-central Pennsylvania and cutting them down from the top. That was the starting point, and like a lot of starting points, it looked almost nothing like where things ended up. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The years between 2005 and the moment anyone subscribed to anything are the part of this story that never shows up in the comments section. Ken wasn't building toward a YouTube channel. He was building toward survival. The late 2000s hit small businesses hard, and Ironwood Acres was no exception. To stay afloat, Ken kept reinventing what he was selling. Native trees for a while, then mulch, then firewood, which turned out to be the idea that actually had legs. Firewood made sense because it used something tree removal was already generating. Material that would have gone to waste became a revenue stream. It worked well enough that the firewood operation started growing, and growing fast enough that it created a problem Ken hadn't anticipated. He needed land. That need for space is the direct reason the property that would eventually become Lumber Capital Logyard exists. Ken acquired it to solve a practical problem, and once he had it, the next step revealed itself almost immediately. If he was going to be serious about the timber side of this business, he needed a mill. His first lumbering mill purchase was the beginning of something he could not have fully mapped from where he was standing. Because what followed wasn't growth in a straight line. What followed was about 80-hour weeks, no crew, no mentor, and no guarantee that any of it was going to hold together. Ken is a self-taught, first-generation logger. Every mistake he made was a mistake nobody warned him was coming. Every lesson came from experience. In the Pennsylvania woods, where the terrain doesn't forgive and the old-growth timber is enormous, that kind of learning costs something real. Not just time, physical toll, the kind that adds up quietly and shows up later. And what did he do with all of it? He kept going. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. The business matured. At a certain point, Ken actually had employees, people running the mill, people processing firewood. An operation with something resembling a crew, not just one man doing everything in sequence. And as the business stabilized, Ken and his wife Terry started thinking longer. They had children. Those children were growing up around the log yard whether anyone had planned for that or not. Afternoons after school, they'd show up and help with whatever needed doing. Stacking wood, cleaning up, sitting with their dad while he worked. Nothing formal, nothing with a job title attached. But something was being absorbed. The kids started developing instincts, an understanding of how the property worked, what the equipment demanded, what the job actually required on a physical level. Ken and Terry watched this happen, and the idea that had always lived in the background, build something worth handing down, started to feel like a realistic possibility, rather than a hope. The oldest children, Samantha and Zachariah, were the logical first step in that succession. They were first in line. They came in, contributed seriously, and spent real time learning the operation. From the outside, it looked like the plan was working, but life has a way of pulling people toward what they actually want, regardless of what was built around them. Samantha and Zachariah eventually chose to leave. They moved back north, started their own families, built their own lives. There was no conflict in it, no falling out. Two adults made adult choices. And the plan Ken had spent 15 years building around the idea of a family inheritance suddenly had a vacancy at the center of it. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. Emerald and Jade Bron were not the inheritors Ken had built his succession plan around. They were younger, they were still growing into their roles when Samantha and Zachariah left, and there was nothing inevitable about the path that followed. But when the moment came, they were present. And present turned out to be the most important qualification of all. Ken and Terry made a deliberate structural decision. They set Emerald and Jade up as co-owners of Lumber Capital Logyard, LLC, alongside Terry. Not a casual arrangement, a legal entity, separate from Ken's logging operation, Ironwood Acres Timber Harvest. The split was clear and intentional. Ken would work the wood side, running logging jobs for local landowners on his own. The girls and their mother would run the mill. That division of responsibility is worth sitting with for a moment. A man who spent 15 years grinding to build something handed the operating entity to his wife and 2 daughters. Not as a gift, but as a structure. A real business transfer with real ownership stakes and real lines of accountability. He didn't stay involved in the mill operations to supervise. He stepped to one side entirely and kept doing the work he'd always done, alone, in the forest. And Emerald picked up a camera. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Before Emerald Bron was a YouTube creator, she was a dancer. Not casually, formally trained, with an instructor, committing to it the way people commit to things that take over a portion of their lives. That background doesn't show up anywhere in the Lumber Capital Logyard content at first glance. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it, but it's responsible for something that is immediately obvious when you watch the channel, even if you can't name what you're responding to. Content creators talk constantly about authenticity, but authenticity without an instinct for how things look on camera is just footage. What dance training actually develops is an understanding of how movement reads from the outside, where the eye goes, what creates tension, what creates release. It's a performance intelligence that most people who start filming themselves spend years trying to build from scratch. Emerald didn't have to build it from scratch. She already had it. She taught herself to run the Woodmiser LT70, which is a significantly more capable machine than what Ken had started with, and she figured out how to translate the daily reality of running a sawmill into video that people couldn't stop watching. Viewers who had never thought about where lumber comes from found themselves genuinely invested in whether a particular log came out clean. The comment sections filled up with people who came for the woodworking and stayed for the family. That doesn't happen with good equipment. It happens with a specific kind of eye. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. Emerald is the face most viewers associate with the channel, but the operation that makes the content possible runs on 2 other people and 1 man who arrived in 2019 and quietly changed everything. Jade Bron is described by the family as the one who makes things happen. Her work is primarily operational, the behind-the-scenes infrastructure that keeps a functioning sawmill actually functioning. She handles most of the filming, making her the eye behind the camera for a majority of what viewers see. Given total freedom and a quiet afternoon, she'd rather be reading. The Logyard rarely offers quiet afternoons, and Jade handles that fact without complaint. Terry Bron manages the website, the social media, the online orders, the deliveries, the machine maintenance, and the chainsaw inventory at the yard, while also operating equipment when the work demands it. In the videos, she tends to stay in the background, but remove her from the equation, and the channel's consistency becomes impossible. She is the operational backbone of everything Lumber Capital Logyard does when the camera isn't running. And then there is Grandpa Larry. Terry's father moved in with the family in June of 2019, a full year before the YouTube channel launched. He brought his dog Tennessee and a skill set that the family had not previously had access to. Larry is a mechanic and a builder. From the moment he arrived, he started reshaping the physical environment. He built a greenhouse, he constructed a chicken coop, he renovated the garage and expanded the house. His mechanical knowledge meant the family could learn to repair their own equipment rather than calling someone every time something broke down. Think about what that actually means for an operation with no outside employees. When a machine fails at a sawmill, it is not a maintenance ticket, it is a production stop. Every day the mill sits idle is a day of lost revenue and delayed orders. Larry's arrival eliminated an entire category of vulnerability that would have repeatedly slowed everything down. He never appears in marketing copy. He is rarely at the center of any video. But without him, the channel that racked up 80 million views does not exist in the form it exists in today. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The Lumber Capital Logyard YouTube channel launched on August 4th, 2020, into essentially nothing. No waiting audience. No established community of sawmill enthusiasts queued up to subscribe. No influencer pushing the channel to an existing fan base. Just Emerald pointing a camera at the reality of what her family did every day and putting it online. The comment sections tell the story better than any analytics dashboard could. People who discovered the channel through the algorithm, which started pushing the content toward woodworking hobbyists and homesteaders somewhere around 2021 and 2022, consistently described the same experience. They came for the lumber. They stayed for the family. They found themselves genuinely caring about the outcome of a specific log, the repair of a specific machine, the week's haul from the forest. That kind of viewer investment doesn't get manufactured. It gets earned, one video at a time, by people who never once let the camera catch them pretending to be something they're not. The channel now sits at over 224,000 subscribers, more than 80 million total views, nearly 400 videos. In early 2026, Woodmiser, one of the most respected names in the professional sawmill industry, featured Lumber Capital Logyard in their podcast. That is not a YouTube metric. That is recognition from within the industry itself. The family runs a Patreon, a merch store, and ships product. All of it with no outside employees. Every hand that touches the operation belongs to someone who lives in the same house or drives the same road to the logyard every morning. And while all of it has been accumulating, Ken Bron has been spending his days alone in the Pennsylvania forest, harvesting old-growth timber for local landowners, running his logging operation as a solo operator, not a YouTube personality, not a figure the audience has parsed and followed and built parasocial affection for. A logger, walking into the woods every morning to do the hardest, least visible part of the whole enterprise. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me because this next part is why the whole story matters. There is a philosophy running through everything Lumber Capital Logyard does that doesn't get named directly in the videos, but shapes every decision the family makes. It starts with Ken, the man who spent years figuring out how to use every part of every tree he took down, long before waste reduction became a content angle. Sawmill byproducts that most operations would discard get turned into charcoal and compost. Actual products, sold to actual customers. Nothing leaves the yard without being used for something. The operation runs entirely without hired help, not as a cost-cutting measure, as a structural choice. Every decision passes through people who have personal stakes in the outcome. There is no managing someone else's expectations or scheduling around a crew that punches out at 5. The family decides. The family acts, the family lives with what follows, and the vision keeps extending forward. Emerald and Jade have spoken about wanting to preserve artifacts from the timbering history of their part of Pennsylvania, to document what logging looked like before it became what it is today. That kind of ambition does not come from someone trying to keep a channel alive. It comes from people who understand that what they are doing exists inside a longer story, and who want their work to honor that context. Here is what you are left with when you trace all of this back to where it started. In 2005, a man began climbing trees in backyards to pay his bills. No blueprint, no employees, no mentor who had done it before him. The original succession plan involved children who made their own choices and walked their own roads, the way people do, the way they should. And the two people who inherited what he built were not the original candidates. They were younger sisters who stepped into a vacancy and turned it into something nobody saw coming. Emerald built a YouTube channel in a niche that barely existed. Jade kept the operation running beneath it. Terry held every thread together without making any of it look difficult. Larry arrived and quietly solved problems before they could become crises. And Ken kept walking into the forest. 80 million views, a family business shipping product, posting multiple times a week, and earning recognition from the professional timber world. All of it built on a foundation that took 15 years to pour, in a corner of Pennsylvania that most people could not find on a map. The real decision that changed this family forever was not a single moment. It was the moment 2 older children left, and 2 younger ones refused to let what their father built disappear. The Bron family did not build Lumber Capital Logyard by following a plan. They built it by surviving the collapse of one. Watch where Emerald and Jade take the operation from here. Specifically, whether that vision of preserving regional timbering history becomes something the channel documents in a dedicated series, because if it does, the content is going to be unlike anything else on YouTube. And here is the question worth thinking about. Samantha and Zachariah left to build their own lives, and nobody in this story holds that against them. But do you think the channel would have existed at all if the original succession plan had worked out the way Ken designed it?